We're joined now by Tal Keinan, chairman and co-founder of investment management firm Clarity Capital. Mr. Keinan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So what does it mean that Israel is ranked so high in this index? Should we be surprised?
Probably not. I mean, right, so we're talking about per capita wealth, and I think in that latest index we're ranked 11th in the world. We're growing. I mean, this is a country where GDP growth has been particularly high for the last 10 years. By the way, I think we've crossed $35,000 GDP per capita, which makes us kind of a top-tier European country in terms of GDP per capita, and that wealth accumulates.
Right. Well, at the same time, if you look at the OECD data, you see essentially Israel at the very bottom of the list in terms of OECD countries when it comes to poverty and inequality.
Right.
How do you explain that?
So first of all, that's a natural tension. In general, there's going to be a high correlation between growth rates and inequality. That's something that we see across the board. Israel is not unique in that perspective. Yeah, I think there's a few issues that are particularly endemic to Israel, which are probably addressable, although some of which we might not want to address. Part of it is that a very large component of our GDP, over 40%, is exports. And a relatively small part of the population participates in the export economy. I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but it's really on the order of 200,000 people who are employed in technology in Israel out of 8 million. And that's driving a huge chunk of our GDP.
What exactly, can you elaborate a little bit more on the exact role that exports play?
Well, so I'd say a few things. Exports, I don't want a double-edged sword would be too hard a definition, but exports have, I'd say pluses and minuses. On the plus side, clearly if you're exporting, if you kind of think of the three components of GDP, which is consumption, government spending, and exports, or exports minus imports, the first two are self-contained. Okay, if something is produced and consumed in the same country, its contribution to wealth will be marginal. Right. If something's exported, the contribution to wealth will be substantial. So the fact that we have high exports is a big contribution to the growth of wealth in Israel. That said, it makes the cost of living in Israel more expensive, and that happens through the exchange rate. So the shekel has been one of the strongest currencies in the world over the last 10 years. And that has bitten us in many ways. It makes it much more difficult to make a living for the economically weaker sections of the Israeli economy.
I mean, this is part of the reason why you had the uprisings that we had in Tel Aviv in about 2011. People still aren't making more money. Do you see a change there?
Well, there's going to have to be eventually. So I think large gaps in wealth, and particularly large gaps to access to opportunity to create wealth, are not sustainable over long periods of time. So we definitely have to address that. I would argue that the appropriate way to address it is not by trying to take down the top earners in the economy, but to lift the bottom earners of the economy. And in that sense, I would say from a policy perspective, we don't want to hurt our exports. That's something that's been good for us. There's another force going on in the Israeli economy, and I think that's much more what the protests were about. Whether all the protesters are aware of it or not is a different question, I think.
Right.
But we are essentially an island economy here, in that many of the basic goods and services that we require just to live in Israel are produced locally for a small market, and in certain industries, just to get to economies of scale, you can only have a few players. So, dairy products were really the symbol of that protest. Dairy is a great example of that. How many dairy manufacturers can there be for 8 million people? And if you only have one or two, monopoly economics will kick in. And I think that's the bigger problem.
Okay, well, Tal Keinan from Clarity Capital, investment management firm, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.